Is the UFC the best representation of mixed martial arts? Let's find out. Dana White is the CEO and president of the UFC, whereas Ariel Helwani is a notable MMA journalist who was recently removed from the UFC a little while ago, meaning like about 10 years ago, for asking too hard-hitting of questions and breaking the news a little too early on something. Now, the UFC and MMA are kind of the same thing, but also not. UFC is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, whereas MMA is mixed martial arts. MMA is what the UFC falls under. White and Helwani used to be friends, now they're foes. The UFC is the best representation of mixed martial arts. We're going to cover this point first and see how valid it is. In the UFC 300 press conference, Dana White was in 2024 filled with energy. He was so loud, so proud, talking about how this was just the greatest event that he's put on ever. He sells holy shit moments for a living. He's enthusiastically announcing Conor McGregor's fight. He's got strong syntax structure. Semantically, he has nothing to hide. He's very, clear in all of his verbiage. Anybody can understand him because his excitement is contagious. I had a smile on my face the entire time when he's breaking down this 7-minute, video of him 7 minutes talking about one fight. It was the most exciting thing ever. However, Adesanya versus Pyfer, this press conference took place about a week ago, where Dana White, after hearing Joe Pyfer nearly took his own life earlier in the week, he was like, "Oh yeah, holy shit. Yeah," and he gives this look. He really does not care. Let's be real here. He does not care. He used very dominating vocal and nonverbal language to establish dominance in this press conference. He kept the listeners engaged, but more so in a "what is he going to say next" type of attitude. His syntax was there. I mean, there's nothing much to say about it on this one. But semantically, he was clearly having double meanings in his words, where he was talking about John Jones, who's another fighter in the UFC. He was saying things like, "Who gives a shit? Shut the F up and watch these fights," except that he actually said it, in response to people criticizing him for putting AI in his promotional material. That's absolutely ridiculous. He should not be doing that. Now, let's take this other point. The UFC is not the best representation of mixed martial arts. Ariel Helwani, he's a former UFC correspondent who is now his own independent journalist. He was speaking on the Paramount deal here, where he excellently articulates his points. He breaks them down into 4 separate parts. He's got good volume and energy in everything that he says. His sentence structure, his nonverbals, they're great. He was mostly clear in semantics-wise until the very beginning, and then he kind of cleared up from there, but it was a little hard to understand if you don't really know what he's talking about. He also exposes how the fighters are being mistreated and engages the viewers by showing them, how great this deal is for them. Because previously, before the Paramount era in ESPN Plus, you had to pay $1,000 a year between pay-per-view and streaming services. Now you only have to pay $80. Pretty darn good deal if you ask me. Now, let's look at the other one. Ariel Helwani, he's seen here speaking on the UFC's political agenda. He doesn't necessarily air out his frustrations here, but he's clearly angry with the way that the sport is going downhill. His volume and nonverbal language is definitely passionate, but also very professional. He's got no issues syntax-wise, he's very easy to understand. There's really no double meanings. There's nothing you really have to question. But this is not necessarily a full-on hit piece. It's more of a show of genuine concern. He keeps the viewer engaged with his fiery criticism in his verbiage, and he says things like, to pretend that, the UFC is not, clearly siding with Donald Trump is ludicrous. He says things like that, and it just really keeps the viewer engaged. Now, who had the better emotional appeal? We have to break down UFC 300's 2024 press conference and Adesanya versus Pyfer's 2026 press conference. There was real excitement, real engagement in Dana White. He was showing generosity, authenticity, relatability in his 2024 press conference. He gave $600,000 to one fighter for winning 2 bonuses in one night. He announced new fights that were very high profile, and he was genuinely happy to be there. In contrast, with Adesanya and Pyfer, Dana White brushed over all the hard questions. He lacked all interest possible towards the event. He was genuinely irritable, hostile, bored. He was using lots of profanity. He was just overall kind of sick in the head when he was making this press conference. Now, in retrospect, when we look at the Ariel Helwani emotional appeal that he used, Ariel Helwani emphasized with both the fighters and the fans. He shows us with honesty and criticality how he genuinely cares about the sport's future. He is enlightening the fans. He is showing them why they should care about the sport and where it's heading in the Paramount era. At the same time, when looking at the politicals of this situation, Ariel Helwani is very politically unbiased, but you can tell that he's not fond of what's going on here. He uses comparisons that are very accurate to the viewers, help them understand. He guides them because a lot of the viewers of mixed martial arts are generally conservative. He kind of shows us why maybe not having Donald Trump as a figurehead in the UFC will, maybe we shouldn't have that going on, because it's really not good for business when we care more about what the president thinks about the product than what the fan thinks about the product. Now, my final verdict. I don't think the UFC is the best representation of mixed martial arts, and I'll tell you why. According to some research that I did, UFC 306 ticket prices, $1,500 for nosebleed seats in the Sphere. $40,000 for the most expensive ones. That is ludicrous. That is some people's entire yearly income. You can't do that. Now, they're putting on low-quality slop events in this UFC Apex arena, which is basically already sponsored by Meta, which is Zuckerberg's company, and they are showing off, how great they are in terms of their little venue in Las Vegas where they put on terrible fights, really terrible fights. There is genuine fan disrespect with how they are investing in Power Slap and Zuffa boxing. Power Slap, by the way, is where two grown men or women take turns slapping each other in the face until one of them goes unconscious. The other one is Zuffa boxing, where a lot of Dana White's money lately has been going into. He's very interested in trying to make a boxing promotion just as big as the UFC, except that he wants to exploit the fighters even further than he does in MMA. Now, those are his techie side projects, but what about free speech? Kareem Zidane and Ariel Helwani both have been completely shut out of any UFC event attendance lately because of their hard-hitting questions, which Dana White does not like. Now, a lot of journalists are getting banned for asking certain questions, for doing investigative reporting, for doing all sorts of stuff like that. But we're going to mostly focus on the other thing, which was the White House event. Now, a lot of these reporters are criticizing the White House event, and you don't hear that much criticism at the actual press conferences because they're banned. These reporters are not seeing the light of day inside of that media room. Now, I would say in general, I think that this sport is my baby. I love this sport to death. However, the UFC really does not represent MMA as a whole. They put on low quality slop. Their fans are genuinely being disrespected. There's tons of tacky side projects out there. Don't even get me started on Dana White's surfing reality TV show he did 20 years ago. And free speech, you can, talk about how great Donald Trump is, but the second you bring up something regarding the product in a negative light, you're out of there. That's not how we should run MMA. I don't think it's a good representation, and I don't agree with it. Here are my citations. Thank you so much. Have a great day.